Well, that was an extraordinarily kind introduction from Steve, but let's face facts. You all know that in 1979, I joined the Natural Resources Defense Council as the director of the energy program, and I stand before you 35 years later as the co-director of the energy program. If you want to talk to people at NRDC with prospects for advancement, you talk to Carl Zakella and Julia Prochnik. What I may be able to do is to offer a word or two of historical perspective. I thought it might be helpful for me to do that, and then frame some challenges that are all built around an appreciation for the fact that the really extraordinary thing about this event is all of you. And the fact that the ISO could be seen by this group as a convener and a trusted partner. And that says more than anything I can say briefly now about the extraordinary prospects for solving a problem that was first posed 20 years ago. I want to start with the problem, the initial failed effort to solve it, and then my optimism for all of the ways in which I know you will solve it together, along with a couple of other achievements that I thought were worth highlighting in what I insist on calling the 20th anniversary of the California ISO. Now, this will be a revelation to those of you in the ISO who know that, wait a minute, we were formally incorporated in May of 1997. How is it our 20th anniversary? Well, I'm holding in my hands an artifact of the pre-internet age. It is a document from the Public Utilities Commission with a blue cover. I wonder how many people in this room know what the Blue Book is. All right. I did not come here to relitigate any aspect of the Blue Book. I simply came to make sure that all of you recognize, I believe that it is in the Blue Book that the first official recognition is taken of what will become the California ISO. It's not called that. It is called out as an institution which, in the vision of the Blue Book, which was in some respects, let's be charitable, flawed, but I think they got this one right, it was going to be the regional transmission organization. And some of you remember, because some of you were there with me, as officials of the state of California went out across the West in the immediate aftermath of the release of the Blue Book to persuade all of the Western states that the time had come to join California in a mutual exercise in integrated transmission management. And some of you sat with me as regulator after regulator, speaking to audiences neither this large nor this appreciative, tried to make the case that under California's benign leadership, this experiment would work to the benefit of the entire West. It did not work well then, but something quite different is happening here now, and I want to reflect on that in a moment. Even as I begin by acknowledging a couple of other things that happened early that reflect extraordinarily well on the infant institution that then came into existence in May of 1997 as the California ISO. The first problem that the California ISO had to solve, and it is so obvious that the problem has been solved that it, I suspect, doesn't even register with most of you, but I want to just pause for a moment and get you to remember that what had to be done in 1997 was to create an institution, really for the first time in history, that could be said fairly to be accountable to both the state of California and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, with both bodies feeling an equal sense of ownership and partnership, coming out of an era and a body of law in which there was always clear definition, federal versus state, one was always supreme over the other. The notion of a partnership was radical and revolutionary, and almost no one thought it would work. And it has worked. And you will get the strongest possible evidence of that tomorrow when you get a wonderful keynote address from a Republican member of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, Phil Moeller, who feels the same sense of ownership and pride in the achievements of this partnership that I feel, and who will be saying a lot of things that I suspect, without any advanced coordination whatever, will be appealingly consistent. And I just think we should pause for a moment and glory in that achievement. It had a lot to do with some very good early governance. It had a lot to do with the good judgment. California ISO has always been fortunate in its board leadership. It is fortunate today. But I think we all recall, I hope you all recall who the first chair of the California ISO was, because he's sitting 3 feet away from me, and I've decided to forgive him for the crack that he made during the introduction. But James Mutney Jones was a good choice, and we've made a lot of good choices since then, and that is a big part of the reason why the federalism problem was solved. The other problem that had to be solved in order to get us to today, in order to get us to a moment where we could contemplate everything that the rich discussion of this morning put forward, was to solve a second problem that no one had solved, getting California energy agencies to work effectively together. As many in this room know ruefully well, has been impossible for decades. The rivalries between the California Energy Commission and the PUC were legendary. To bring a new major player in, one which was inclined institutionally, at the beginning at least, to be quite skeptical about some of the things the Energy Commission and the PUC were doing. Many, I think, believed in its early stages that the California ISO's role would always be to be the loyal opposition as the PUC and the Energy Commission tried to press ahead too fast, too far with environmental and clean energy leadership. And a moment at which it became blindingly clear to me how far from that we had come. And how, in terms of capacity of the agencies to work effectively together, just something I had never seen, was at a hearing that was basically designed to expose the problem. The way you always identify in the cruelest and clearest light the failures of interagency coordination is to drag everybody in front of California's redoubtable Little Hoover Commission, which happened just this past April, but many of you with me have seen it happen over and over the years. And under the skilled cross-examination of the commissioners, the facade of unity and cooperation always falls away. And we have another useful lesson in how California energy matters might work better. And I think that the April 2014 hearing, many people thought would be just like that. But since not all of you were there, indeed I'm not sure any of you were there, I was, and I just want to report to you that I saw something extraordinary, and it is available over the internet, so I want you to look at it. If you go to the Little Hoover Commission website and you look at the April 2014 hearing, you will find joint testimony, historic joint testimony, by the California PUC, the California Energy Commission, the California ISO, and the Governor's Office. It's a joint statement. It reads as an integrated whole. It was presented to the Little Hoover Commission by Bob Oglesby of the Energy Commission, by Ed Randolph of the PUC, and by Karen Edson of the California ISO. And one could not, in listening, discern which institution was speaking because the institutions were speaking together about a clean energy partnership that had delivered, and you heard some of this from Steve this morning, 14,000 megawatts of renewable energy generation, an even larger quantity measured as a resource of energy efficiency, major technology innovation, the largest clean energy and energy innovation R&D fund in the country outside of the Department of Energy, a connected story about a collective effort to achieve a vision that appeared from the legislature in AB 32, and I think all of you would have been proud at what you saw that day. And I think that what we have been talking about in terms of substantive achievement, not just in terms of aspiration, speaks eloquently to the force and effectiveness of that partnership. Now, in moving forward and in thinking about what happens next, one of the appealing ways in which the California ISO has repositioned itself, again, away from, and this is true in much of the country, the reliability organization, the transmission organization, always is the voice warning that something awful may be about to happen if anything changes too rapidly in a well-embedded status quo. That has kind of been the historical role of people in the ISO with ISO-type responsibilities. It is worth noting, appreciating, and applauding the fact that the California ISO has broken from that history and has made itself a full partner in the venture of the clean energy transition that we will talk about all day today and tomorrow. And if you want to see the detail of how that has been done, it's not simply public rhetoric. In terms of institutional planning, I commend to all of you the strategic plan that appears on the California ISO website. which is a strategic plan for how a grid operator can mediate, facilitate, and support the most ambitious clean energy transition underway in the country, and to do it as a full partner, and to do it in a way that will ensure reliable and affordable service, which of course remains at the core of the institutional mission. But to have that kind of leadership at this particular moment is critical not just for the West, but the entire world. At the same time, what you can see from the California ISO is visible. This is not the official logo of the California ISO. I think it was created for this event. I've talked to Steve about it. I like it. You'll notice that it says ISO stakeholder. The CA hasn't quite disappeared. I think it's sort of embedded in the symbol. But in the symbol, the sun is rising across the entire West, including California. And it's the ISO. It's your ISO. It belongs to the West, and it has made of itself not by stepping into hostile forums, not by any kind of institutional imperialism, by quietly making itself invaluable. So that if you think about, for example, the innovation represented by the energy imbalance markets, which is a glorious market-based approach to minimizing the cost of integrating variable output resources. Our friend Dave Olson taught us long ago not to talk about intermittent resources. They're variable output resources, just like there's variable output demand. Nothing magical or horrifying about that. But the energy imbalance market, the whole notion of how important it could be and how much value it could add across the West, the reason it's going to succeed, and the reason it's going to succeed as a Western venture, is that the voices in support of it are coming from people like Rebecca Wagner, like Travis Kavula, like Kevin Lynch, Pat Wrighton, and tomorrow Phil Moeller. Those are the voices, and it is a sense of shared expedition ownership and achievement and shared benefit that is the reason why this and then the cascade of ideas that follow it will succeed. What you are in the process of doing with the energy imbalance markets is creating the thinking beyond the narrow notion of baseload and capacity, the thinking of how to create markets in flexibility, in innovation, in ways to balance variable output resources at lowest cost, in ways that will deliver enduring benefit to the system, and a market-based approach for doing it. That is a proposition that everyone in the country across the full political spectrum can love. And for proof of it, I assure you, there is no way, you can't wedge between me and Travis Kavula. There is no broader gulf in ideology in the American political system. If we both love it, there must be something really compelling about it. And there is. And as you move forward with it, what I predict will happen is that a whole host of additional ways to add that kind of value will be conceived, that Western states will jump to sign on to that proposition because they want to be part of it, they want to share in those benefits, and we avoid the mistake we made in talking about regional approaches a generation ago, which is that too often we were heard to be saying a more efficient allocation of electricity across the West will generate system-wide benefits. And what too many in the audience heard is a whole lot of value is going to flow to the big urban centers and be lost to the rural parts of the West. The last thing most Westerners were interested in talking about 20 years ago was a system that sounded like a way of reallocating benefit that would help some and hurt others. I believe that with the energy imbalance markets and with innovations like it, we have the compelling case to make that this is not about redistributing existing resources to the benefit of some and the pain of others. This is about creating more value for everyone in palpable and tangible ways that everyone can share. And in making that case together, we will help to unleash a surge of innovation across the region that is absolutely critical to our joint effort of mediating the way to a clean energy future together. I want to offer what I hope are two final suggestions in terms of ways that I think we can do that, additional items to put on our collective agenda. One is the opportunity as we move toward additional forms of regional cooperation, which I submit we must have in order to achieve the aspirations of this room. The proposed carbon pollution standards from the EPA offer an opportunity that I hope will get some deep thought in this room. Not because there will be unanimity across the West on the value and merits of EPA regulating greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. There will be no such unanimity. But I think there may be a growing sense that this is coming, that the global climate challenge is one for which just say no is no longer a plausible response, at least not in American environmental regulation. And that the best approaches to achieving those reductions at the lowest cost will be regional approaches. And as that, now we can do it state by state if we need to. EPA has proposed a rule that is very much oriented toward identifying trends in reductions that are already underway in each state and simply extending those trends into the future. We could simply follow a state-by-state approach based on that foundation and probably do fine. But we'll do even better with regional coordination and cooperation. And I hope there will be some thought in this room about ways in which the California ISO, the energy imbalance markets beyond the California ISO, and all of the other aspects of regional integration that are second nature for most of you, how those could figure specifically, concretely, into a regional approach to compliance with the EPA rule. The initial EPA tendency is to think in terms of regional carbon markets, modeled on the Northeast's Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. But there may well be other approaches that will work equally well, many of them capable of emerging from this room, probably best, initially at least, from states outside of California. My hope is simply that the California ISO will be standing ready to help if asked, because I predict that the requests will come, and I, for one, would welcome them. Let me offer one additional thought in terms of the basis for my optimism that this joint venture will succeed, but also encouragement for all of you to join in a national conversation that has the capacity to have some unfortunate and unintended side effects. And that is the whole issue of the future and value of integrated grids. I think that the ISO, as I will characterize it henceforth in the spirit of that logo, and its constituency, stands as an extraordinary testament to the continuing and enduring value of integrated grids. I have, for the entire 35 years I've been working at NRDC, heard other voices, many well-intentioned and some coming from my own community, suggesting that the integrated grid was in fact a tyrannical insurer of the sustained success of fossil fuels and it should be broken down and dismantled as quickly as possible. And some of the recent rhetoric about death spiral, system bypass, is actually eerily reminiscent of themes that were reverberating around California 20 years ago. Where I think this group can make a unique contribution is a strong collective sense of optimism, not just about the future of the grid, but of its value and importance. In that respect, if you think about Peter Rive's contribution this morning from Solar City, he said some extraordinary things that I hope, he's the exemplar, if there's going to be one in this group, of the proposition that the old integrated grid model is dead. We're going to have a vibrant country full of self-sustaining, atomized houses with their own storage systems and their own power generation. It's not what he said at all. He told you all the ways he was going to add value to distribution systems and all that he was prepared to invest to do it. He talked about his technology innovations as system enhancements and grid enhancements, not grid destroyers and grid replacements. And in doing that, I think he spoke for a whole host of innovators who want a future as partners with the grid managers and operators and who see what they are doing as empowering communities and societies and not simply allowing for a nation of self-sufficient individuals who are no longer interconnected and no longer able to share benefit and value with each other. That was an important moment. Because if we believe that, if we believe together in the value, future, and resilience of an interdependent grid, if we think that's important, if we think that's worth investing in, then we are the strongest possible voice against the only thing that I think really can stop us, which is some kind of paralyzing fear that a cascade, the death spiral is the right word. It was cascading fears of lost investment, stranded investment, inability to recover, inability to participate in a future that stopped us temporarily 20 years ago. It was a denial by some of our regulatory leaders that there was a legitimate role for the grid operator, for the utility, for the system manager in orchestrating the emergence of integrated resources capable of reinforcing each other, driving innovation, improving environmental performance. When we lost the capacity to invest, we lost critical time. Now, recovering that capacity does not mean going back to some kind of bizarre and antiquated vision of integrated monopoly utilities. It vitally means a role for independent entrepreneurs on the distributed generation side, on all of the generation sides, on all of the demand sides, on energy efficiency. It demands a continued appreciation of the fact that the demand side resources matter on the electrical system equally with the generation resources. Not, I hope, a controversial position in this room, but the D.C. Circuit, by a 2-to-1 decision, just effectively tried to nullify that insight for the rest of the country in the context of FERC Order 745 on demand response. Now, no one in this room thinks we need FERC mandates to make continued progress on demand response, although everyone in this room knows we need to make more progress. But it serves as an illustration that if we have reasonable assurance about how these institutional roles are supposed to interact, about how the different partners are going to contribute, about how costs are going to be recovered, and about how value is going to be shared, we're in a much better position to move forward. There was much talk this morning about the complexity of rate design changes that may be needed in order to achieve these visions. And I want to say just a word about that, I hope, of reassurance to those of you thinking, oh, this is getting way too complicated, we'll never be able to explain it to customers, we'll never be able to operationalize it. I think what we need to do, first of all, we need to remember, if I can one more time with this group, no one on earth pays rates, they pay bills. The term ratepayer should be abolished from the vocabulary of the entire electric industry. In the context of what needs to be done to minimize bills, which means full integration of both demand side and generation resources, we've got to keep our eye on two things. It is important that everyone who is connected to the grid pay a minimum amount reflecting the cost that they're imposing on it. And it's important that everyone, to the extent possible, continue to pay based on how much they use. Those are both important principles. We could solve the problem of uncertainty about cost recovery for utilities by having everyone pay a utility bill independent of use. That sounds radical. There is a Texas retailer that will offer you that option. You pay a flat monthly amount regardless of consumption. It took half a second for this to be christened the all-you-can-eat rate, which is what it is. We don't need that. We can continue to charge, as Rebecca Wagner said this morning, based on how much you use. That's the fundamental principle. But everyone who is connected to the grid is going to pay a minimum amount to make sure that everyone is contributing to the cost of the grid that they're all using. And yes, distributed resources should be credited for the grid value that they provide. If we can, those are straightforward principles. Those can be converted into rate design by regulators like those represented in this room. They can be done in consultation with all of the stakeholders involved. It creates the opportunity to do this in a way that is neither divisive nor destructive. And I want to close with a sense that this is something we can do together, along with all of the other items that I've pointed to. And so I'll just leave you with this. The dim outlines of the California ISO of 20 years ago have now matured into an institution whose leadership over the years, starting with Smutney Jones, moving on to the chairmanship of, the glorious chairmanship of the guy we all know as Mayor Bob, people like Angelina Galitova constantly pushing to do, why can't we get to 100% renewables and why aren't we there already? That kind of a persistent, insistent voice. The people like them who are now fully integrated into the California ISO. Dave Olson, who used to rail against the conservatism and obstructionism of grid operators, he's now responsible for grid operation. But what is the greatest reason to be confident we're going to get there together is that we are all here together. Thank you for coming, and good luck with this entire enterprise.